Good. So, last presentation for the day, Igea Troiani from London South Bank University.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to thank Francesco for the invitation. We met through this journal, which I was an editor of. We did 2 issues on the neoliberal university, and one of them was about the spaces within it, and the other was about the kind of logic and the demise, I would say. But yeah, that's how we came in touch, and hence why I'm here. I'm in no way an expert on cooperative housing. My knowledge and my work is in the question of architectural practice and universities in a neoliberal context. I've just finished a book which is about work-life balance. And the book is actually about well-being and the systems in which architecture is constructed, but the way that the architect and the evolution of the architect contributes to that. The first part of the book that I think is relevant is I did a big study of trying to understand architecture's relationship with neoliberalism from a historical point of view, because architects have been deregulated, encouraged to be open market entrepreneurs. People lament, I'm old, I've got 5 years left in me, but architects that have worked on social housing projects lament the sort of direction of the profession. So it's the contextualization of that. The part of the book that's relevant is I focus on the different development of the architect at university, and the work that I'm going to talk about today is about the university itself and the way that the spaces in which it constructs through housing and through the spaces in which we teach construct the potential capital of architecture. There's a particular critique, I would say, that underpins the whole thing. The last bit is about spaces of labour and work patterns and the way they operate together. This is the first thing I wrote about this, was a paper called Academic Capitalism in Architecture Schools. And, I was just about dying from working, and the paper was essentially inspired by a book which I'm going to refer to by Wendy Brown, which is called Undoing the Demos, the Neoliberalism's Stealth Revolution. And the book is essentially about how we have shifted to a fully quantitative understanding of our relationship with the world, and that the qualitative construct has been utterly undermined. And what I'm going to talk about today is, so when I wrote this, a friend of mine and I decided to start making a film. And I'm going to talk about the film, but I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a context for it. So in the pre-modern, I'm going to go in, I've decided to go old school, so I can do lectures by walking around and pointing, but I decided that I needed to be serious about the topic, so I'm going old school. So you're going to have to forgive me on a Friday night, probably not what you want. In the pre-modern or historical university, Michel Foucault contends that people's limits were defined in relation to God or outside the living world, and so materialism was not a central feature of education. Education was concerned with slow learning, speculation, reflection, and teaching of scholars and students to be all-round contributors to society for civic betterment. For Foucault, after modernity, people's limits became defined within the living world, and the role of scholars changed to be gatekeepers, framing historical processes in relation to society. The modern university is driven by very different motivations. Now, under neoliberal governance, many modern universities nowadays take their lead from and have become intertwined fundamentally with business to create the entrepreneurial university. Like any business, the entrepreneurial university aims to spread, quote, throughout the world excellence and innovation in an environment of mutual competitive rivalry in order to enhance their institution in the global marketplace. Creativity in an academic arena is co-opted by neoliberalism for university and industry revenue making. And architectural researchers and teachers and students, they're all kind of pushed into a class that Richard Florida calls the creative class, but they become a means through which capital and labour are commodified. Now, this is a photograph of the Beaux-Arts in Paris. So the early architecture schools in which the contemporary architectural education that we currently have has emerged from. So accompanying the shift in education is how it's taught, how it's learned, the curricula and the curriculum, how it's framed in the spaces in which architectural education takes place. Here a survey of the spatial transformation and transition of architectural schools from the Beaux-Arts to the virtual neoliberal architectural school is set out. And I'm doing it through text, this black and white photography, and a film that I'm going to show in a minute that I've been making. So sites of solely slow hand drawing and in drawing rooms in the École des Beaux-Arts have shifted to these fast, hybrid, in-person, online, virtual education spaces. And the other thing is that the training of the architect is not just happening in the university, but it's happening in their bedroom, and it's happening everywhere and anywhere else in order to optimize productivity. So the contemplative space of architectural education has now become almost a distant, idyllic memory of the artistic architectural scholarship that previously existed in the profession. In the UK, rooms in which to paint, hand draw, to slowly look and study architecture, to contemplate and work with clients, has almost vanished. It's been replaced by open-plan workspaces in mostly modular buildings. The transaction of architectural education, therefore, across the institution happens, as I said, everywhere, but for industry. And I think this is the real concern. And what happens is that what happens in architecture schools then lags the tailcode into the actors in the office. So I think the juggling that's happening in architecture is dealing with these questions of productivity. Now, Shelley Slaughter and Larry Leslie explain in the book Academic Capitalism that during the Industrial Revolution, faculty in various nation states were able to position themselves between capital and labour, protecting themselves from the harsh discipline of the market. Professionals made the case that they were guided by ideals of service and altruism. They did not seek to maximise profits, but instead put the interest of clients and community first. But the nature of how academic labour has changed because of the global economy means that we've had to rethink our position within this context. So the key things are about, and this happens in everywhere, questions of economisation, marketisation, internationalisation. And what that's done is, I think, has changed all the classes of British universities that we have. The shifts have completely transformed the why and what we do. This is a film that I used. I'm going to show a little bit of it because I think it's great. It's kind of, can I click on it in the middle just to play it? Oh yeah, just there. If you click down there, just a little bit along, so we go a little bit further, yeah. So coinciding with the factory mass production practices outside the university, Pier Vittorio Orelli, who's here, explains that with the advent of mass education, universities were designed as factories whose goal was to produce not goods but subjects. Referring to Foucault, Orelli notes the effects of economization on labour and space in the 19th century American factory, an image that's ridiculed here in Chaplin's 1936 film, Modern Times. Now, in the movie, Chaplin's employed on a factory assembly line where he screws nuts at an ever-increasing rate. As the conveyor belt is sped up on the instruction of management, Chaplin's forced to work faster. In an ingenious move to maximize production, a piece of new technology, the feeding machine, is brought onto the shop floor, and the workers are force-fed to ensure their hands are free to work for greater productivity. The space of the modern architecture edge-factory, which is what O'Reilly calls it, intensifies graduate production through new digital platforms for teaching, monitoring, and auditing. In parallel, institutions are being destroyed with the provision of gleaning state-of-the-art education buildings that enable the smooth flow of consumer student capital as graduate products. But as Simon Sadler notes, quote, the model of the university as a locus of criticism within the death relations of capitalism that depended on the possibility of infinite critique, locating the contradictions in the rules and systems necessary to production has declined, so that a growing number of universities are just becoming sites for industry. Following the analysis of E.B. Thompson and his critique of the University of Warwick's shift from industry and management in the 1970s, it seems inevitable, Thompson writes, that the university will be reduced to the function of providing pre-packed intellectual commodities which meet the requirements of management. Now here, I'm going to try and play this. I'm screening a first cut of an experimental film that I've been making. It's called The Death and Life of UK Universities. So I think it was Tom that started with the question, is Britain broken? Well, my question is the British university broken? The film is inspired by Jane Jacobs' book, which is a critique of the great American cities. And I started making it in, it's a co-creation, started in 2017 with the British visual artist and scholar Tonya Carlos. We decided to make a film that, it's an unfinished project of documenting UK universities. So what we've done is we have essentially made a kind of critique of the ramifications of economic and ideological transformation of architectural education, but education more generally in the university, which has been happening infinitum. It's a database. So it's about the gentrification of British universities, and it's a film that's about all of them. So we filmed 12 universities, UCL, Oxford Brookes, the University of West England, the AA is in it actually. I think we came here about 4 years, maybe pre-pandemic. But yeah, there's a lot in there and it goes on. So we keep moving to other universities and each cut of the film is different. So the 6-year project, it's audio-visual, so it's kind of got ridiculous music. But it's kind of like what we all feel like, isn't it? You know, the latest technology of some idiotic thing that is going to transform how we live or work in a kind of university environment. So the film itself is a critique of the spatial model of post-92 universities, essentially. And the British universities understood through the film to be a subject of the extreme crisis of academic capitalism and neoliberalism. Now, aside from the Chaplin film, we also refer to the work of Gordon Matter Clark, the writings of Henri Lefebvre, and to feminist Jennifer Bloomer, among others. Using what Carlos and I have defined as an emotional cinematic collage methodology, we expose an atmospheric feminist critique of the tamed everyday life within the contemporary university for analysis. It develops a critical gaze, but it's a mixture and assemblage of collective memories. It's also about the propaganda, the rebranding, the way in which neoliberalism will sell anything. It'll sell anything. It will sell student experience. It will sell any aspect of it, spatially and, I think, through the experience of education. So what we tried to do with the film was to return to what Doreen Massey refers to as the importance of analysing the spatial ordering of the relations of production, to understand these different dimensions as dimensions which run relations of power and control, of dominance and subordination. For now and in the future context, the film focuses on the fact that there are also dimensions which develop in systemic ways with the evolution of capitalist society. I think the key question of the film is, what are the spatio-social consequences of the everyday life of university students and educators? Now, aside from the refurbishing of existing buildings, many UK universities have taken on debt or spent capital reserves. And I think what's quite interesting for me is that the quantification and the pressure of quantification and the economic imperatives of neoliberalism, the impact on housing, student housing, everyday life, the university. The university is in debt as we are in debt. And that whole picture is the system in which I'm trying to sort of understand the critique of production in the university. Now, if we look at the changes, and I'm just going to play it again because I've got another one actually, because there are 5 cuts of the film. I should have given you a different one. We did one which was on student housing as well, which a little bit of it is on student housing, little tiny rooms. But here we're talking about the modern versions of the Greta Edufactory, which is now moving towards ambitious building programs, state-of-the-art lecture halls, which we no longer really need, 24-hour accessible open-plan studios with computer workstations, 24-hour accessible libraries, open-plan offices, and standardised student accommodation, all of which are replicating a corporate language of globalised professionalism and excellence. But the most remarkable neoliberal contemporary university typologies manifest in the phantasmagorical form, which is something that Donald Spencer calls it. And it's when a university produces a state-of-the-art building in order to sell itself in the market. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the interior. So we filmed and we were quite focused on the interior and the way it's changing, because the interior obviously moves on to the interior of the domestic. So many teaching and learning spaces in the UK universities have been converted into and are designed into versions of casual corporate hubs for lounge space learning, with vast volumes of circulation space devoid of specific teaching or learning functions that allow flexible working for a non-stop society. Many universities have modelled an open-plan Silicon Valley-style company headquarters with soda machines, communal lunch areas, and lounge-style furniture. Now, what I think is interesting here is the way in which student accommodation has changed, and I'm just going to jump a little bit here. Student accommodations changed to meet the needs of a more discerning student market of Generation Z kids or PlayStation generation. So most of the London firms, if you meet an architect that's working on housing for a university, they will essentially be working with the same standard modules of housing that are being produced. They're all working, each university in the UK has a development plan for what's going on, which is intrinsically intertwined with the consumption of the accommodation, which has now become the kind of factor which keeps a university going. But what happens is that the generation of users are more used to a kind of heightened sense of consumerism and luxury. So what's happening is that the accommodation within the university itself, even if it is buying stock from landlords, which many people are, it's becoming a bit of what neoliberalism normally does in the environment. It's creating a kind of affluent sector of people that can afford that kind of thing, and then everyone else is scrambling for what remains. Now, one of the main reasons for going to university was and still is to experience life away from home and to become independent. But learning to be independent does not correlate with austere living conditions nowadays, or so architects think when they're designing these. No longer is student accommodation basic dormitory. In the race for universities to compete for students, many universities have a predominant housing stock, which have had to expand or upgrade their halls of residence, as we've seen today. University students who've grown up as a neoliberal subject, and Wendy Brown argues that under neoliberalism you just get used to it. You just get used to accepting that the divide is there and that the divide is getting bigger. She argues that they're becoming more increasingly accustomed to expecting standards of luxurious living. Now, in the book Future Campus, Design Quality in University Buildings, Ian Taylor argues that building student hotels, which we see more of, is one of the key rebranding tactics to transform university-owned heritage. UK universities have developed sophisticated on-site and digital marketing strategies to advertise these newly fashioned campuses, and the various types of student hotel experience that we're witnessing is emerging more and more. The creation of this accommodation and the glossy animations of figures walking through them as simulations are invaluable marketing material for universities wanting to become more competitive. Now, as Arnie Hochschild notes, just as the spaces of the university have shifted to become more like home, home has become more like work. And through the need to shift to online teaching platforms, what's happened is that our bedrooms, our living rooms have become the sites of the university. The accommodation in which we live has transformed into the university without us even understanding it. Architectural education is moving online, saving on costs, and we're juggling with this hybrid in-person lecture and design studio culture. Where an international student is being taught online in a program elsewhere, education's made efficient in its delivery, and that scheduled teaching and tutorials do not slip beyond the scheduled time period. Okay. Before the lessons of pandemic, Fried and Hansen wrote that in the book Remote Office Not Required, of the generic benefits of remote working, and remote working anywhere, and the possibility to, quote, access the best talent, freedom from commutes, and increase productivity. Because of the autonomy to manage one's own work, reduce workspace interruptions, and not be tied to living in cities. Flexible work is one way in which neoliberalism blends home life and work life to unconsciously increase productivity. As Cronenberg notes, the requirements for flexibility stem not just from the desire and possibility, but also from economy and necessity. Due to the fact the phenomenal pace of what organisations are changing at, and which generational differences in expectations and outcomes of work in the real and virtual workplace are changing, it's not really yet possible to determine how shifting to home-based and remote-based work everywhere and anywhere will end up, and how those changes will affect our bodies and minds. In summary, emotional cinematic discourse analysis questions the culture of architectural actions in a space and is used in this research to prioritise the experience of space that emerges from the actions and events that occur within it. Here, the analysis considers the concept of memory without history and locates history within an experiential and emotional realm. Through this framework, the research has the capacity to investigate the widest spatio-political discourses on identity and education, the production of labour under neoliberal capitalism. The social figure of the researcher is a priority here, and to quote Jennifer Bloomer, she wrote, "I am an academic, I live my life in the spaces of the academy." The film is understood to be in opposition to this abstraction. This is about the deliberate in the use of multiple sources to examine the labour of production, the labour of living, and the labour of learning in university spaces. Matter Clark's and architecture sought to interrogate rather than reaffirm architecture's relationship with capitalism and power. And for this reason, excerpts from his film, The Conical Intersect, were included here. Matter Clark's interest was in the powerless minorities represented by the old townhouse couple in his film, who were dispelled from their homes for a new modern image of Paris, reinventing the museum as a site of production, all in the name of governmentality and government rationality. In the process of recuperation beyond neoliberal capitalism, we need to identify and highlight difference to then examine sameness and non-identity with a heightened cinematic sensitivity to atmosphere and sites of historical action that might offer a possible detournement. Thank you very much.